Welcome to our seminar, Unheard London. The session is the first of a series of regional seminars we're holding on the impact of the cost of living crisis on pregnant women, new mothers and their families. When we began looking at the cost of living crisis and the women we worked with, we decided to run seminars which focused specifically on migrant and asylum-seeking women alongside seminars which covered the mainstream. This is because both of the very specific circumstances of migrant and asylum-seeking women, and because of the very different treatment of these women in current policy. We called our seminar Unheard London because it was clear to us that migrant and asylum-seeking women are not being heard in the debates about the cost of living. We don't see their stories in the media. We don't hear their needs being discussed in Parliament. It's not that there aren't women and frontline organisations willing to talk about the harsh impact of the cost of living on migrant and asylum-seeking women. It's that those who make the policy are not interested in hearing from them. So today is about exploring the experiences of migrant and asylum-seeking mothers in the cost of living crisis. And it's also about how to change the government's response so that these women's experiences are properly recognised in the package of government interventions to support families. But there is no argument that we are dealing with increased costs across the board. Annual inflation reached 11% this month, and the Office of Budget Responsibility, a government agency, is predicting 12 months of recession and for unemployment to increase by 500,000. While there are predictions of growth in the future, these are necessarily uncertain predictions. The benefits of growth are not evenly spread throughout the population, and any possible rosy future should not distract from the certainty that many families will be having a very dark and difficult winter and an increasingly difficult 2023. The government has announced a package to respond to the cost of living crisis, which the recent autumn statement costed at £49,815 million. So that's just under £50 billion. This consists of help with energy prices, inflation-based increases in universal credit and in other benefits, one-off payments of several £100s to different groups of benefits recipients, and an increase in the benefits cap, capping of social housing rents, an additional £1 billion for the Household Support Fund. What is missing from this package is an increase in asylum support, an increase in Section 17 support, and in anything, in fact, which would benefit those outside the mainstream. We have increasing numbers of pregnant women and new mothers who are falling outside the mainstream. Changes in the immigration system make it harder for migrants to get and to maintain secure immigration status. Over the past 15 years, we've watched as migrants are increasingly forced to make multiple applications for leave before they can achieve settled status. Applications are expensive and the system is complicated. It is, unfortunately, very easy for women to find themselves without status, and it is very difficult for them to regain regular status. For asylum seekers, the system is excruciatingly slow. The government target is a decision within 6 months. However, only a fraction of claims are settled within this timeframe. Women and their families are left waiting for months and years, and the backlog is increasing. In March, there were 110,000 people waiting for a decision on their asylum claim. Alongside these changes have been a succession of policy decisions to remove different groups of migrants from the mainstream benefit system. Asylum support used to be set at 90% of mainstream support. No recourse to public funds rules and the chaotic aftermath of Brexit exclude many migrant families from benefits and services. Section 17 support, which was supposed to be a short-term measure, became the only support available to some families, and there are pregnant women and families who cannot access even this form of support. On top of this, the government expanded the scope of NHS charging. Increasing numbers of women found themselves chargeable, and NHS trusts have become more aggressive in pursuing debt. For many women, this meant avoiding care altogether, or attending only when they're in labour or when something has gone horribly wrong. We know that the impacts on pregnant women and new mothers are harsh. We know that many are living in poverty and destitution, and that this will worsen as inflation reduces the real value of their incomes. We know that many of the informal options will dry up as those families also tighten their belts. Poverty and destitution exacerbates health inequalities. Already, Black and brown women are 4 times more likely to die during pregnancy and new motherhood. There is every indication that this inequality will deepen as the recession disproportionately impacts on this group. There are also real concerns about exploitation and abuse. How does a woman leave a violent relationship when she's wholly dependent on her abusive partner to feed her children? And how many women will end up in situations they would never otherwise end up in, excuse me, because of severe poverty? So what we'll do now is move on to the panel sessions. We have a great set of speakers here come at the seminar today. Some bring their own experiences of migration and motherhood. Some work to deliver healthcare and support to women, and some are active in campaigning. And our first speaker today is Sheke, who will be speaking about her own lived experience. Sheke is part of United Impact at Project 17, and we're very pleased to have her with us today. Sheke, can I hand over to you?
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. My name is Sheke, and I'm from Project 17. Concerning the cost of living and how it affects people like me and people under asylum. With the support provided under Section 17, there are limitations to what we can do with money. The amount is low, and cost of living has risen, but the support amount has not. When you speak or complain about this to social worker, there is nothing that has been done or I think will be done about it. It has left us now to readjust ourselves and use our initiative to manage the amount, which has really affected most families emotionally and mentally, with having to pay for water bills, electricity, gas, and even clothing for the children. I personally have a little boy, and my kids tend to react when it comes to the cold weather. They have running nose, flu, and etc. I have to manage with either feeding them or turning on the heater. It's not been easy, even with clothing. They now need clothes to keep them warm, and which I have to arrange to get mittens, hats, socks, jackets, but with a little support, and that doesn't cover all this cost. On top of that, I received a maternity bill for giving birth to my little boy, which I couldn't afford to pay. They would constantly ring me to ask for payments. And when I say I can't pay, they would say it would affect my status and could lead to immigration officials showing up at my doorsteps. And hearing that, I'll have to run helter-skelter to find a way to make the payment, because I wouldn't want that to affect my status. And when I stop paying, they'll ring again and ask. And there was this particular time when they did ring me, I was confused. And I had to say to them, where do you expect me to pay? I could hardly even feed my family on my own. And at that time, I was living with help from charity, vouchers, and food banks. But luckily, I was being referred to a group of solicitors who later spoke to me about the maternity team, and they were able to help me out with the maternity bill. And I also have to pay for medications whenever my kids fall ill. With my status, I don't get free prescriptions. Now having to choose between health, food, clothing, or eating up in the house, it's so awful. It really makes me mentally drained and many at times fall into depression. I personally, as a person, and on behalf of millions of people out there going through similar situation, we would appreciate the government to consider that now that the cost of living is high, they should consider looking into the increase of the help they're giving us under Social Security 17, so that we would not have to strain and, check between having to choose between health, heating, clothing, and other things for the family. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sheke. That's a really powerful statement of exactly what the cost of living crisis means to you and your family. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. And yes, again, thank you. Very, very powerful.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Sheke, are you able to stay in for the Q&A session, which we'll have after the next speaker? Is that possible?
Because I have to do things for my little boy.
Okay.
So I wish I could stay. I'm so sorry.
No, that's quite okay. I know you have got childcare responsibilities, but I'm sure there's other people who are here today who'd like to say thank you also. But I appreciate you being here for this part of the panel session. Thanks again. We'll move now to our next speaker, Ella Spencer. Ella is public health midwife at the Homerton Hospital. Ella, I think you have some slides, so perhaps Michaela could put those up for you.
Hi, I'll try my best here. I'm not very good at doing things and putting presentations together, so please bear with me, but I'll try my best of presenting as much as I can and as much information as I can. Yeah, if we can go to the next slide, or can I control this, or is it Michaela?
It's me controlling.
Oh, right. Okay, yeah, if we can go to the next slide then.
Let's see. There we go.
So something, I don't know if you guys have seen on ITV, there was a interview with some women, asylum seekers, which was very harrowing and horrible to see that. So since 2017, 8 babies born to asylum seeking mothers, sorry, can I just, housed in the Home Office accommodation have died before their first birthday. 7 of these deaths have taken place since 2022. So obviously this is something that is not okay, and something that probably we will, a lot of factors come into it, and we will hopefully, fingers crossed, touch wood, it is not going to be increasing, but yeah, with the cost of living, we're not too sure. Next slide, please. So just as this is a standard slide for women when we first book them, we go obviously through what a healthy diet is. So obviously we need women to have a well-balanced diet, protein, meat, fish, eggs, carbohydrates, fruit and vegetables, dairy, calcium. Yeah, I'm not gonna make it stupid. You guys know what carbohydrates and fruits and vegetables are. And then vitamins that we standardly want women to be taking, vitamin D, which can be found in a lot of food, but mainly you need it during the winter times for bones and muscles, and obviously folic acid, which we would want the woman to be taking, if possible, prenatally, and then up until for 12 weeks. Then this obviously helps prevent any neural tube defects in babies. Some women may need a higher dose if they have any underlying medical conditions, or if there's any history of any neural defects in the family or with partner, etc., or for themselves. Next one. So health for asylum seeker migrant women. So vitamins are not often being taken with this group of women, unfortunately, especially prior to being booked, as they cost money and are hard to access sometimes. Multivitamins are often given as a free supplement through the booking midwife if available, and thankfully they are free. If the lady does have an NHS number, which often can happen that quite a few of our women don't have NHS numbers, an FW8 form can be given. So this is a form that we give, and we can do it also online, and this helps with free prescriptions during the pregnancy and up until the baby is 1 year old. So that is a good thing. So usually our women are unaware of the need to take vitamins. So education around this prior to, there's no education around this prior to the appointment. So low income, so foods that is purchased can often not be fresh and as healthy. And they're not also entitled to things such as rose vouchers. So rose vouchers you can often get from children's centres, etc. And these can help support you get some fruit and vegetables from certain places such as markets, etc. Food, and also obviously food prices going up, but then obviously asylum seeker women, migrant group are not obviously being given more money to help with all of this. Next slide. So another thing that we very much focus on in pregnancy to have a healthy pregnancy is mental health. So there's obviously increased diagnosis of mental health in our migrant and asylum seeker women due to PTSD, because due to their history, depression of what they might have been through getting here or even in their country. And obviously it's sometimes also due to the current circumstances they're in. In pregnancy, it's 50 times more likely for mental health to increase, especially if there's a history or diagnosis prior to pregnancy. The impact of clients' housing, financial circumstances, supporting their unborn child, isolation, and anxiety also around their visa applications also impact their mental health. Mental health is just as important for the health in pregnant women as physical health is. So we're always constantly asking women how their mental health is, even if they've said last time in the appointment it's absolutely fine, they feel well in themselves. We'll then ask again each time, because obviously your pregnancy every day can be different, especially for these women. So many women are very isolated, single mothers, which can also have a big impact on their mental health. Next one. So housing. So this is a big impact. So important for pregnant women to be warm and in a good condition house. A lot of asylum seeker and migrant pregnant women are in housing that are not in appropriate conditions. As public health midwives, we can sometimes access and go into housing. So it's something that we can do to see the condition of the house. And especially if they don't have social services input, it's kind of for us to kind of see the conditions that they might be in. It can then mean that we can, especially if they've got elder children, to make those referrals to social services to kind of support the fact that they shouldn't be in these kind of housings and fight their corner. Overcrowding, sleeping on friends' couches, floors, etc., sharing rooms with other asylum seekers, poor conditions, mold, damp, cleanliness, heating and gas and electricity. Obviously, a lot of the housing has poor insulation. They've got prepaid meters, which can be more expensive, especially with gas and electricity prices going up. Little money to help with all of this. And then also the risks of SIDS as well, because obviously mold, damp, poor insulation, etc. This can all have a big effect on SIDS, which is sudden infant death syndrome. Next one. So providing and preparing for baby, a lot of the time, these clientele have a little money to help with food, housing and food, etc., let alone to prepare for baby, cots, clothes, nappies, etc. Not having a proper cot can cause women to co-sleep, which we often find on postnatal visits. These women can be co-sleeping, which can increase the risk of SIDS once again. Asylum seeker women can sometimes be reluctant to ask for this support due to feeling embarrassed and not realising that we can actually support with a lot of this. providing a lot of support with breastfeeding as it is best for baby and for the client, not only for the health of the baby and the woman, but for financial reasons too. So we try to encourage that a lot. If baby does need formula, then this is another financial burden, as they're not entitled to any milk vouchers. Not entitled to benefits, maternity sure grant, which is anyone that was on universal credit, etc. If it's their first baby, especially, they can get a one-off payment of £500, which really does help towards things for baby after 28 weeks. And obviously they're not entitled to child benefits, etc. once the baby's born. And then also not entitled to Healthy Start vouchers, which is really beneficial. Sorry, I saw SIDS. So it's called it stands for Sudden Infant Death Syndrome, which is when a baby may pass away very young when they're born. So yeah, and unexplained reasons. So there's no health conditions usually, very sadly, usually it's mums waking up to baby in the cot passed away. Yeah. Next one, please. So access to healthcare. Some asylum seeker pregnant women would be reluctant to refer themselves for antenatal care, which is obviously not what we want at all, as they are worried that they will be charged. This can particularly affect refused asylum seeking women, as they may no longer be exempt from the charging. Also, those with an active asylum seek claims may wrongly also be charged. Finding the support to attend antenatal appointments if they already have children and have no support to care for the older ones. Once again, they might then DNA appointments because they can't maybe bring their child to the scan department, etc. So then this makes them not attend routine appointments. And often our doctor's appointments and things like that, it can overrun, etc. Because they're big clinics, and this, once again, if they're waiting around, they might leave because they need to go and get their child from school, etc., because they have no one else to do this. Money to attend appointments, which seems like absolutely ridiculous that we can't provide that for these women. But yeah, money to getting to hospital, etc., can cost quite a bit for an asylum seeker woman. To get there via public transport, and especially in later stage of pregnancies, if women are finding it very hard to walk, etc., they might live the other side of Hackney to get to their appointment, and so walking can even be harder, especially in the winter. And as we know, poor antenatal care can have a high correlation with being a poor outcome for the client and baby. So yeah, I think that's it.
Thanks very much, Ella. That was a fantastic overview of some of the really horrible situations that the women are living in. We're now going to move to Q&A. So if people have got questions, would you please put your hand up? Hopefully that will pop up on my screen when you do. But in the meantime, I've got a question, Ella, just to start with. You mentioned difficulty buying healthy food. What's the consequence if women can't buy or eat a healthy diet during their pregnancy? What are the health impacts?
Often you find that sometimes that they can get other conditions, so things such as, well, a lot of the time the cheaper foods are in places like Iceland. I'm not putting down Iceland or anything, but you do find that a lot of those foods can have a lot of processed stuff into them, and with eating that kind of food, you can get conditions such as gestational diabetes. So these women can have a very unhealthy, and you're supplying food to baby that's very unhealthy, and then obviously understand, and then themselves, they want to eat obviously often for baby, but they're eating foods that's not nutritionally good, which can cause their sugars to rise, and then they can cause gestational diabetes. Gestational diabetes, if it's not controlled properly, is higher risk to having stillbirths. So diet is a very important thing.
No, thanks for that. And there was this terrible news report recently of a 2-year-old child who died because of unhealthy accommodation. I think it was mould in the house. Is that an issue during pregnancy as well as for small children?
I wouldn't be able to actually give you a statistic on whether it is. However, it's not beneficial for the I would more be worried. It's not okay for a woman to be living in that condition, no, because you're understandably giving baby, you're supporting baby. I think, to be honest with you though, when we see newborn babies in that condition, so we're visiting postnatally and the babies are actually living in those conditions, I think it's much more detrimental to these newborn babies. I have been in situations where I've had to fight women's corner, especially around COVID times when no professional was going into houses except for ourselves, really. And I had 2 women and with their elder children living in absolutely awful conditions. And one was so awful that she ended up having, the elder girl had fluid on the brain and having convulsions and ended up having 2 brain surgeries in Gosh. And it was only then that people started to kind of realise that they needed support and they needed moving out. But I was the only one going in saying, this is awful, you can't leave children in this condition. But it had to get to that point for these children to be removed, and that's just awful.
That is really a terrible story,
Yeah.
Ella. I mean, I think everyone's been hearing about the pressure on maternity services at the moment, that they're short-staffed,
Yeah.
you know, that there's huge demand for for more capacity in maternity services. Is dealing with problems like this draining time for midwives, or is this?
I think it can be hard when the criteria. So it can be, and I wouldn't want to call it that. It's just very hard trying to sit there because you want to fight these women's corner and you're trying to get as much support as around you, and you're trying to support these women as much as you can. And it's very hard trying to get every professional involved to support you. That's what's kind of time consuming, I think, really, more than anything. But actually, when it does happen, and it shouldn't have happened that this poor child went through this situation, but actually what had happened is actually everyone did group together and we ended up moving this family, and they were doing really well when I discharged and left. So when it works, it's great, but it is a lot on I think it's just a lot on everyone, really, not just midwives. But yeah, it is a lot of work. Yeah. Sorry, I don't know what's in that.
No, I think it is an answer. I mean, obviously, you know, part of the role of the midwife is to advocate for these women.
Yeah, I think it's more part of our role as public health midwives. So that's where we have to support our community midwives in taking that over. And yeah, that's part of our role to try and make sure that we can give a bit more time to these women, whereas community with midwives can't do that. They don't really have the time to do that. Yeah.
No, thanks, Ella. I think we have one hand up. Kerry Stevenson, would you like to ask your question?
Hi, yes. A quick question about the maternity supplement. As I understand, I think you can get, is it £500 or £300 as a one-off payment if you're a certain week in pregnancy?
That's only if you receive universal credit, or your partner does.
That doesn't exist for asylum seeking women? No,
unfortunately not.
Okay.
That's what's a shame. Yeah, it's a real shame. We've got services that we do refer to, but it's charity based stuff. So it's all, we actually, to be fair, we're quite I feel we're quite good at Homerton. We're very good at kind of, as public health midwives, collecting. So I'll go, I kind of make a thing at Linden Children's Centre where I base that if they've got any donations going from any mums, then I'll go and get them from them, store them at Linden Children's Centre, and we can give them out and things like that to women. But there's also charities that we can But I feel like as us public health midwives at Homerton, we're quite good at going, has anyone got a buggy for a woman? Has anyone got this for a woman? And we try to team together to kind of do that. But yeah, that's our kind of only real way of getting things for babies. Yeah.
Wow. So there's no kind of central support, because is there a slight increase in the payment per week by like £3?
So as far as I know,
asylum
from the Home Office, sorry, I don't.
Yeah.
Maybe someone can correct me on this. It does go up to £80, I think, when the baby's born, a week. But I might be wrong there.
Look, I might step in. We actually sent a note around with a summary of entitlements with the papers that went out for the meeting. So it's probably because I think it's quite complicated.
Yeah,
to sort of unpick the payments. So there's additional payments in pregnancy, some additional payments when the baby's very young. I think there is a payment around the time of the birth, but it's a bit of a mess, I think, and a lot of women don't get it. But I think perhaps if we can refer back to that outline of entitlements rather than putting Ella on the spot to try and unpick all of those. I think that would
be better to do. And obviously all of my women some have been given money by the Home Office, some it's very complicated how they're different statuses and stuff. So it's kind of a bit, I don't really understand some of, but sorry.
No, look, Ella, it's entirely understandable. I mean, I think that the complexity of the system is part of the challenge that everyone's trying to deal with, because so much is dependent on the specificity of someone's immigration status. We have two other hands up. Jackie Gilby, would you like to ask a question? You'll have to unmute yourself.
Done it. Thank you. Yeah, I've just put something in the chat as well about pregnancy entitlements. So there is extra money, and this is part of the problem, that professionals don't know these sort of things. You're not trained in it. So it's usually the charities that do know the entitlements, but there definitely is. There's a £300 maternity grant. You do get extra money for
sorry, I stand corrected. Sorry, I didn't know that.
I was just going to ask though, we know that malnutrition in pregnancy is really common, but I don't know, how does that present? Is it in bloods? Is it that women aren't putting on enough weight? I don't know how
so often it can be weight, malnutrition. Well, I didn't talk about that, because obviously malnutrition a lot of the time, like I'm going to say her name's Seke, like she says, a lot of these times if the women have got elder children, they're kind of toying with whether I feed my children or whether I feed myself, with the little money that they have got. So of course, sorry, I stand corrected, malnutrition can happen. It's obviously in pregnancy as well. A lot of the time we'll do these women's weights, so we do at least one weight every trimester, which we will be recording and seeing their weights from before. And the other thing is we can be there's a lot of the time these women can come to us with some kind of symptoms which we're saying, okay, this doesn't sound right, headaches, etc., feeling generally unwell, dizziness, things like that. We can offer dietitian referrals and speak to a dietitian, obviously, if we do think it's something that's underlining, but then also bloods are also another thing, especially with the gestational diabetes. So these are things usually often a woman, they'll have a high blood sugar before we would send them off a test for diagnosis of gestational diabetes.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks for that. Roxanne Hackney Baby Bank.
Hi there. I just had a quick question, quite specific question, but I work for a local baby bank right close to Homerton Hospital, and we receive a lot of referrals from the hospital and also from Project 17 in different places. We have 60 to 70% of our women being referred are refugees or asylum seekers. Now, I'm hearing a lot about the people's housing conditions, and you mentioned mould and the detrimental health impacts. I'm not quite clear how us as charities and organisations can then signpost people to receive support. Is a safeguarding, do you know? So, is a safe, Ella, sorry, I'm directing this at you. Is a safeguarding referral to the local authorities the best way to go? But
if the woman is pregnant and you do know, so it depends on their housing situation, and it can get a bit complicated. So if it is a case of the woman, there's not much we can do if the woman's kind of in a house of a friend, etc., and she's in that house, except for refer to social services, to be honest with you, especially if they've got children and this family. So that, like I say, the family that I spoke that was living with an uncle who was living in this condition, and then the children were in the worst room possible, actually, to be fair, and especially being COVID, these poor children were not going to school, etc. And yeah, so stuck in this one room with a lot of mold. But yeah, so often we refer to social services, and that's the way we have to go with children and the woman being pregnant, because a lot of the time you might right to housing, or they might not have any rights to housing in the condition, like such as staying at a friend's house or whatever, and their visa. So a lot of the time, like that situation, I just referred straight to social services, because it's kind of one of those situations of where else do you go to kind of raise the alarms and say this isn't okay. Because if you send emails to housing, just say they are in a house, I find a lot of the time it goes unanswered. I don't know about others, but I rarely get any response back for any housing. So if I find children or an unborn baby in that situation, I'll just refer to housing, to social services.
okay, thank you so much.
That's all right.
Thanks, Roxanne, for that question. Very difficult situation.
Yeah.
And clearly no clear, straightforward, simple answer.
No.
No. Okay, well, that'll be the end of our Q&A session for our first panel. So thank you very much to Sheke for speaking, and for Ella for speaking and for providing such helpful answers to the questions. So thanks again for taking part, Ella. We do appreciate it.
It's okay.
Great. Okay, we'll now move on to our second panel session. And just as an update on that, we have on our agenda Asfa Kassir from Project 17, Carolina Marashek from the 3 Million, Emma Burks from Asylum Matters, and I've just now had confirmation that we'll also have Sir Stephen Timms, who's from the Labor Shadow Ministry, who'll be speaking also about no recourse to public funds issues. So the plan is to run through our 4 speakers and then move on to another Q&A session. So if you do have questions, can you save them up until after our 4th speaker? So we will now welcome Asfa Kassir, who's from Project 17, Policy Coordinator. She's also in her spare time works at Maternity Action. So lovely to have you here, Asfa. Thank you.
Thanks, Roz. Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to speak at this really important seminar. And as Roz has introduced me, my name is Asfa, and I'm currently the project coordinator at Project 17. So Project 17 works to end destitution by working with families and children who are experiencing exceptional poverty in order to improve their access to local authority support. The families we represent are mainly vulnerable due to their undocumented status and/or are subject to the no recourse to public fund condition. And we provide advice to these families who are facing homelessness and extreme poverty. If we could have move on to the next slide, please, Michaela, thank you. I think as we've been talking already, I think many people in the audience are probably familiar with the NRPF policy, the no recourse to public funds condition that many of these women are subject to. And if I just explain a little bit about that, as the slide says, it prohibits access to mainstream benefits. So therefore it means that many women and children are exempt and ineligible for homelessness support, interim accommodation and temporary housing as a result. And we often see that this severely affects victims of domestic violence who are subject to the NRPF condition because they often struggle to access refuge spaces which are funded by public benefits. The interesting thing is the founding principles behind the NRPF policy were to reduce the burdens on the taxpayer, promote integration and tackle abuse. However, there is no evidence to support this, and what we do know is that it disproportionately affects non-white single mothers. And in fact, in recent research published in March 2022 by Dr. Andrew Jolly of Plymouth University and Professor Anna Gupta at Royal Holloway University, they found 26 serious case reviews over the past decade in families with no recourse to public funds. Domestic violence featured highly in cases with the victim feeling unable to leave the family home or threatened with being reported to immigration if she did. The report concluded that the circumstances of the lives of children and families subject to the no recourse to public funds rule including poverty, precarious housing and social isolation are extremely harmful for children and challenging for their parents to be able to provide safe and adequate care. They found that the current child protection system focuses on harm caused by parental action or inaction, with an absence of attention to social detriments of harm and how these impact children's development and parenting capacity. As a result, it does not adequately safeguard children where harm arises from being subject to the no recourse to public fund rule. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So Project 17 represents families to access Section 17 support, which is provided by the local authorities. Section 17(1) imposes a general duty on local authorities to safeguard and promote the welfare of children in their area who are in need. And this derives from the Children's Act 1989. Apologies, I omitted to put that on that slide. So Section 17 is not restricted to UK citizens and creates a duty to both support the welfare of the child and the parents or primary carer of the child, regardless of nationality or immigration status. However, it is important to note that central government does not provide individual local authorities with specific Section 17 funding. In fact, this was a recommendation made in the recent Work and Pensions Committee report on child poverty, which was published in April this year, and which looked at the no recourse to public funds condition, amongst other things, and recommended that the government should provide targeted support to local authorities for families with NRPF. The current lack of any specific funding therefore creates a tension as it shifts the financial burden of providing support onto other government departments, local authorities and civil society. If we could have the next slide, please. So, as I already explained, Section 17 provides there is a general duty to safeguard and promote the welfare of children in need in the local authority area. The local authority has a duty to support children in need, but only the power to support an individual child. This means that the local authority can take into account other concerns when deciding whether to provide support. For example, if they're facing budget cuts and cannot afford to help. However, in some cases, this power can become a duty, and a power will become a duty where a failure to provide support would breach the human rights under the Human Rights Convention. This means that Section 17 support can be used to assist children and provide accommodation for the whole family. This duty to provide support is usually exercised by the no recourse to public funds team based within a local authority. Although it varies across across the country, with some local authorities outside of London operating without a dedicated NRPF team, which results in very poor services and a misunderstanding or lack of training around Section 17 duties under the Children's Act 1989. We also see some local authorities applying a destitution test, which is a higher threshold than a child in need test, which is what is required under the Children's Act. And it is also common for local authorities to have specific policies in place for which details the amount and type of support being offered under Section 17. Again, this tends to be for those local authorities dealing with many more people subject to NRPF, and we often find that in London that is the case. But freedom of information requests can be made to find out if a local authority does have a policy in place. In fact, Project 17 makes annual freedom of information requests, and some made in last year. We found that the rates of subsistence being provided by local authorities fell way short of, were providing unlawful rates which were below Section 4, or there were no policies in place to decide what those rates should be. It's interesting to note that after considering all the evidence provided in the Working Committee's inquiry into child poverty, the report of which I've mentioned, which was published this year, and inquiry into child poverty and no recourse to public funds, they concluded that the local authorities were operating their own welfare systems without any proper regulations as to standards for this. Can we go on to the next slide, please? So now I want to look at Section 17 support and what it includes. So the type of support provided to families under Section 17 varies from local authority to local authority. Some, but not all, local authorities have policies in place to guide staff on what this support is. And sometimes it can be hard to find out what this policy is. And local authorities may often indicate that this policy is under review and without providing you with a copy of that policy. So as I said earlier, making freedom of information requests to the local authority will help to find out if they are operating a policy and what it contains. So support, Section 17 support is provided in two ways, in the form of subsistence and accommodation to families who have been assessed as being in need. Subsistence, Section 4 rates of support are deemed as the bare minimum level of support, and we usually find that local authorities either provide support equivalent to Section 4 asylum support rates currently assessed at £40.85, or, as I've said, rates that are much lower than this. So Section 4 rates are deemed as a bare minimum level of support to prevent destitution and are unlikely to meet a child's assessed needs. Section 17 is intended to promote the welfare and best interests of a child so that a much higher standard of support is provided to a child in need. However, there is no set amount, and each particular local authority makes the decision themselves depending on their own budgets. And so we routinely see rates falling well below the £40.85, which is unlawful. There is no uniformity across the board, so it is really dependent on where you live. We also see, and this has already been discussed earlier, that there are very little or no uplifts for children and pregnancy by local authorities, even though with some local authorities they may have policies in place to provide certain uplifts for children under the age of 3 and women who are pregnant. We're also seeing increasing provision of subsistence in the form of vouchers instead of cash being provided to families, and this is another worrying issue because it limits where families can shop and also restricts their movement. So for example, you can't pay for a bus ride using a voucher. We're also seeing the operation of prepayment cards and looking at the potential of whether this is a way of monitoring how families shop and how they're spending their money, and also punitive and aggressive agreements that clients are being asked to sign before they can access support. And this can also act as a deterrent. Accommodation. So section 17, sorry, if you just go back to the previous slide, thanks, Michaela. So we also see local authorities can provide accommodation in the form of section 17 support. So provision of accommodation from social services is not regulated by the same or similar statutory guidance as mainstream homelessness support under the Housing Act 1996. For example, there is no mandatory duty to provide interim accommodation for families with children who are subject to NRPF, as there is under the Housing Act 1996 for a homeless family. There is also a lack of knowledge as to how accommodation is sourced under section 17. Consequently, families are often refused interim accommodation in the first instance and housed in inadequate accommodation for long periods of time. Section 17 accommodation is also on a no-choice basis. Therefore, we often see very poor accommodation, which can include situations, as already detailed by Ella, of families living in damp and mold, as well as overcrowding and sharing facilities with other people, for example, kitchens and bathrooms, and properties being in a poor state of disrepair. The standard of accommodation provided under section 17 is unregulated, and we often see families being moved regularly at very short notice from one property to another. It's not uncommon to hear of families being asked to leave the accommodation with no knowledge of where they are going to next, and often being left out on the streets with their young children and all their possessions in bags. Families provided with accommodation under section 17 often live long-term in hotels, hostels, and houses of multiple occupation. Many of these properties share a lack of cooking space, and facilities mean children can be left without adequate nutrition as their parents are unable to cook for them. Families are often forced to rely on expensive and unhealthy takeaway food options. For parents with children with food allergies, this is particularly difficult. If we can move to the next slide, please. The difficulties with accessing section 17 support. So we routinely see that not only is section 17 support quite limited, but there is extreme gatekeeping when trying to access this support. So we see excessive gatekeeping of section 17 support. It has the effect of imposing unlawful barriers or thresholds to accessing support on already vulnerable families facing homelessness. Gatekeeping tactics can include denying the evidence that families provide to access the support, requesting unreasonable evidence, wrongful refusals to support based on immigration status, excessive delays in conducting child in need assessments, and denying territorial responsibilities. So we can often see that families are being yo-yoed between one local authority and another. And it is not unusual for a family with children to remain all day at a local authority waiting for someone to take on their referral. Sadly, it is also not uncommon for representatives from Project 17 to be ignored when advocating on behalf of clients. So you can imagine if an organisation who is advocating on behalf of a client is being ignored, you can only imagine how the actual client is being treated when approaching the local authority on their own. And it's very rare that families will be supported without the help of an advocate in place. Families with children in need and facing homelessness often face a difficult decision to access section 17 support. Then when they do, we see the aggressive interviewing styles threatening to take children into care or being told to go back home, which can often lead to families refusing to access help because of their traumatizing experiences. When families do access help, they're faced with a culture of suspicion that they are not destitute and a lack of understanding of the social networks that may have been providing support for the families up until this point. Social workers do not seem to take into account why families may not be reachable, so they often don't explore the reasons that the families presented as hard to reach or engage, and sometimes closing cases rather than exploring these reasons further.
Sorry, it's Ros here. Can I just give you a time hint?
Oh, yeah.
Thanks very much.
Okay. So we see this sort of, unbelieving tactics and unreasonable evidence, as well as long delays when carrying out assessments. And there's a real culture of disbelief and undeserving migrant hostility. If we could just move to the next slide, please. Challenging refuse. Okay, so there's a significant issue regarding the provision of Section 17 support is the absence of any legislative framework in this area. It literally operates like the Wild West. Many families with NRPF are at risk of homelessness without any statutory regulations with teeth to protect them. As it stands, there are only two sources of guidance. There's the Working Together to Safeguard Children guidance, which provides that the purpose of an assessment is to gather information about a child to quickly to decide whether the child is in need. And there's also the NRPF network, advice and guidance to local authorities about the statutory support that is available for people who are excluded from mainstream benefits. However, it's only guidance, and we find that local authorities don't often ignore this. So currently, the only challenge to unlawful practice is judicial review, but we find that finding a solicitor to challenge decisions is getting harder due to the lack of capacity. Hi. Sorry, Rod. Thank you. Yeah, I've just wrapped that last little bit up. I'm aware about the time. Sorry about that.
No, that's great. Well, look, thanks very much, Asper. That was a really thorough presentation on the horrors which are Section 17. So thank you for taking us through that. So as I said before, if people could please keep their questions until after our group of speakers. The next speaker is Carolina Marashek from the 3 Million, Community Manager at the 3 Million. Carolina, would you like to present? Thank you.
Thank you. Can I have the slides, please? First of all, it's great to be here and to have this opportunity to talk about the situation of EU citizens, especially the less privileged amongst us. I represent the 3 Million. We are a campaigns and policy organization representing EU citizens, and maybe a point of clarification, when we talk about EU citizens, we mean EU, EA and Swiss citizens who were resident in the UK before the 31st of December 2020, and their family members who, they can be of any nationality, who have joined or are still joining them now. It is a large cohort. There are various estimates, between 4 and 5 million people probably. So even if it's only a small percentage of people falling through the cracks, it is still large numbers. And also, just to say, EU settlement scheme is quite a new thing, and it seems that the Home Office is experimenting quite a lot. So there are still a lot of problems with it that we are seeing every day at the 3 Million. If I could please have the next slide, thank you. So one of the huge problems we are seeing with, in the case of EU citizens, is the delays in the applications, the processing of the applications by the Home Office. Actually, there is the delays occur at various points. In the first step is to issue the certificate of application when someone makes a valid application. There are delays with those, and those certificates in themselves prove certain rights and help people access support. Then there are delays in the decision making itself, in administrative reviews. So, for example, when the sort of guidance was that the reviews will be conducted in 6 months. Now it's been extended to 12 months. And then obviously at the appeal stage, there are also delays. It has a huge impact on welfare and housing rights of people. There's a lot of confusion and mixed messaging. There are various sources of guidance from DWP, from the Home Office, from local authorities. There are also press releases and memos. So when someone, and we know that, for example, there are 12,000 cases still stuck waiting for outcome over 18 months. For example, there's various statistics around it, but that's just an example. When someone is in this situation, they're completely lost as to what support they can access. Also, that confusion obviously affects the decision makers who have got their own interpretation of the various sources of guidance. And just to give an example, there is somewhere in, I think it is the Home Office guidance that says if someone is expecting to be awarded settled status, they can claim benefits on the same basis as any British citizen. Well, how does a caseworker make the decision for someone seeking homelessness assistance or is trying to claim universal credit? It is really, really confusing. Obviously, remedies in terms of challenging the decisions by DWP or housing departments are very slow. And especially in terms of universal credit, advisors are really also trying to navigate the complex guidance and take people through appeals. And obviously, we know there is no legal aid for making those appeals in the tribunals. Another sort of problem for EU citizens is that they will also have to go, lots of them who've got pre-settled status will have to go on to apply to sort of upgrade the status to full settled status, at which point they will be able to access mainstream support. And there are all sorts of problems around that. And I'll go on to talk, if we could go to the next slide. So everyone who's got pre-settled status will have their own personalized deadline for making the upgrade application to achieve settled status. There are, in fact, two dates there. The first date will be the first date when they can make an application for settled status, and if it's granted, they can access all the support without any complications. And then the second will be the absolute deadline by which they have to make the upgrade application. So effectively, it's a window during which they should upgrade to not lose the status completely. And we know that Independent Monitoring Authority, the body responsible for monitoring EU citizens' rights under the withdrawal agreement, has brought a case to challenge that system, effectively to protect people from loss of status and loss of all their rights. So just to go back to the pre-settled status holders, we are all hoping that with Brexit and the new EU settlement scheme, the right to reside problem will go away. The right to reside test is a complex test that is applied to EU citizens to establish whether they're entitled to mainstream support. Often we have to look at the rights under the EEA regulations 2016. So are they a worker? Are they self-employed person? Or have they retained worker status? If that fails, maybe we need to look at derivative rights, for example, Tejera, if they were a worker and also the primary carer of a child in education. If that fails, there are some arguments based on non-discrimination rights within the withdrawal agreement itself. And some legal scholars also argue that there are some arguments based on clients' fundamental rights. So those rights enshrined in the Charter of Fundamental Rights, rights to a dignified life, family life, etc. So all of that myriad of potential ways to claim mainstream support is really complex, and is also very difficult to challenge when there is no legal aid, and the sector is also very well confused themselves about how things can be challenged, and we see there's very little capacity as well. So just maybe we could move to the next slide. A case study. We don't do casework, however, people report their situations to us, and we had a single mother of a 3-month-old child who was separated from her baby's father. She stopped working because of pregnancy, and then she was suddenly evicted by her landlord when she was 7 months pregnant, so sometime in the past, and she tried to claim universal credit. She was turned down 4 times because she didn't pass the habitual residence test, the right to reside test. She could have retained worker rights, perhaps. She could have retained this retained status worker, retained worker status. Sorry, but it appears that DWP did not examine her employment history. The council who refused housing assistance should have made their own investigation instead of relying on DWP's decision. Clearly, they didn't consider the arguments in the withdrawal agreement or the Charter of Fundamental Rights. And it appears that even if they didn't make all these investigations as to whether she can access mainstream support, they also haven't made any sort of a child in need assessment so that she could access at least Section 17. So she ended up living with a friend, and I'm not sure how she managed financially. If we could move on to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the EU settlement scheme is a relatively new scheme still, and the Home Office is experimenting effectively on EU citizens. It also in the area of digitization. All EU citizens have got digital status, or those who have status. And the Home Office claims that digital status cannot be lost, stolen, or tampered with. Well, this is not our experience, sadly. I have on the slide you have you have one screen from the Home Office website where someone with status is trying to log in and access their information there, and also produce the so-called share code, which will be needed to pass on to agencies to prove their entitlements. When it doesn't work, it is effectively that the status is lost. And we are seeing a lot of people reporting various situations to us. They cannot log into the system to prove their status, they cannot generate share codes, or if they access the information on the portal, sometimes the information is incorrect. So that now the Home Office actually have responded to us and have told us that in majority of cases, yes, it works, but they're aware of technical problems. What we think is much too late to try and improve the systems when there are so many problems with it and they're aware of them. They should have done much more robust testing beforehand, and we are worried that the digital status is being rolled out to other groups of migrants, and basically it's a very dangerous situation where a lot of people can lose a lot of rights effectively. We have, as the 3 million, we have proposed alternative forms of digital status, ones that would be more in control of the status holder. And we have also called for years for a physical backup so that people who are particularly vulnerable, or if there are any technical problems, they will still retain their rights and will be able to prove them to relevant agencies. And finally, just briefly, because we've been talking about the NHS, there is equally confusing guidance as to NHS charging that is relevant to EU citizens, particularly for late applicants. People who have made a late application to the scheme, we know that the deadline was the end of June 2021. A lot of people haven't made the application in time. When they have made the application and they access NHS, they will be non-chargeable until a final decision is made on the USS application, or if they go for appeal on the appeal. If they have a certificate of application, so that first document that the Home Office needs to issue when they validate the application. If they are granted subsequently pre-settled or settled status, they will remain non-chargeable. But if the application is refused, if the final appeal is dismissed and they have no status effectively, they will be chargeable for the whole period when the application was pending, and they will be invoiced for the care that they received. For babies, they are the healthcare that they need and access is non-chargeable in the first 3 months from when they are born, and this is the window when the parents need to make sure to obtain their identity documents and also make an application under the EU settled scheme. If there are any reasons with that, any problems with that, also the healthcare for the child will be chargeable. It is a similar situation to that of joining family members who have received the EUSS family permit. They arrive in the UK and then need to make an application under the EU settled scheme to gain status. In the first 3 months, they are non-chargeable. However, if they don't obtain the status, they may be charged by the Home Office. By the NHS.
Carolina, sorry to interrupt. Would you be able to wrap up? Please?
Yeah, just the final slide, just to sort of call out. We are very interested to know about what's happening for people on the ground. So we ask everyone to report any problems with the application process under the EUSS, and also with digital status, particularly the two, through our online form. But also if there are any other problems with accessing any sort of support, an email would be very welcome. We try to either support or do our own legal challenges, so we're always on the lookout for situations where rights are breached, and we work with the IMA and other institutions to see what's going on for people. And I also included 2 useful resources, Work Rights Center, that we also work closely with. They have some cost of living resources on their website, and they have a great universal credit entitlement checker. So I recommend that anyone who works with EU migrants and has got problems around eligibility goes on and checks this tool. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carolina. That was a very thorough overview of the many problems, clearly the many problems facing EU and EEA nationals in the UK. Now, according to the agenda, next speaker is Emma Burks. However, unfortunately, the timing is slightly out. Emma, so you'll be going on one speaker ahead of us after this. We have with us Stephen Timms, the Shadow Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, who's here with us until 11:30. Delighted to have you here with us, Stephen. Thanks very much for joining us. I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ros, very much. I should explain, I'm not the Shadow Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. I'm the Chair of the Work and Pensions Select Committee, the all-party committee, which I've been chairing. Apologies. That's right, chairing since January 2020. And one of the points we've been looking at on that committee is the uncertainty around social security entitlement of people who have pre-settled status at the moment, exactly the points that 3 Million has been drawing attention to, and I very much welcome their work, and I hope we can get clarity over the rules for those claimants in the near future. But I very much welcome this event. I apologise that it's only a rather brief appearance on my part, but I did want to take part today to listen to the presentations and to make a few comments, because our committee has done a significant amount of work in this area, and I very much welcome the focus on mothers in this event, and the fact that Maternity Action has taken the initiative here. I think it's absolutely right, because that's really where the biggest problems are, I think, with the no recourse to public funds policy. We published a report of an inquiry. We published it in April of this year in a series of reports looking at the problems of children in poverty. This was called Children in Poverty, No Recourse to Public Funds, published in April, and we made some recommendations about what ought to be done to improve the position. Unfortunately, the government rejected those recommendations, but I'm hoping that in due course we can persuade them or another government to adopt a different approach. I think the first point to make here is we really don't know how many people there are who have leave to remain in the UK but no recourse to public funds. You'd think that would be a fairly basic piece of data, but the Home Office says at least they don't know what the answer is. There's an estimate from the Migration Observatory at Oxford University that I think they suggest that perhaps 1.4 million people have leave to remain in the UK with no recourse to public funds, including about 175,000 children. But we really don't know. And certainly I meet a lot of people in my constituency who are in this position, which makes me think it may well be that across the country the number is bigger perhaps than the number that the Migration Observatory estimates. Most frustrating about this is that the Home Office doesn't even know how many people they gave leave to remain to last year with the no recourse to public funds condition attached. I mean, you'd think that surely would be just a question of kind of tossing up number of letters or something, but they don't. They say they don't. They say that they are in the process of introducing a new integrated casework system, and that once that is fully implemented, then they might be able to answer these questions, even though they can't at the moment. They originally said they should be able to do that from 2021, and then they said it was going to be by the end of 2022, and I've just tabled a question to try and get an updated answer, and at the moment they're kind of avoiding the question altogether. But I hope that it won't be too long before we get some numbers, at least some more reliable, authoritative numbers about how many people have got leave to remain in the UK with no recourse to public funds. For those who do, life can be extremely difficult, as we've been reminded already. The Select Committee report made a number of recommendations about this, and I just wanted to highlight two of them as really first steps towards dealing with the great hardship that too many families with children are facing in this situation at the moment. The first one was that where there is a family with no recourse to public funds and the family has children in, then that family should at least be entitled to child benefit in respect of those children. At the moment, they don't. There's no benefit payable. And I can't see the justification for that. I think it should be fixed. But then the second recommendation I wanted to highlight is that no family with children should be in the position of having leave to remain but no recourse to public funds for longer than 5 years. At the moment, many such families are in that position for 10 years. They're on the so-called 10-year track to achieving indefinite leave to remain. Once they get indefinite leave to remain, then they are able to claim social security, but that can take 10 years. And frequently, the families that we're talking about have already been in the UK. Sometimes they've had their children when they were here on another visa, like a student visa. And then eventually they get leave to remain, they put on this 10-year track. Our argument is that no family should be in that position for longer than 5 years. And I think there's a very strong case for that because, you know, once a family's been here, once the child has been living here for 5 years, they're not going anywhere else. They're not leaving anytime soon. They're going to be part of Britain for the rest of their lives. So it's right, surely, to provide support for them along the lines of the support that is provided to all other children. And we provide that support because yes, it's in the interest of the children, but it's in the interest of
I think we've got a glitch in the recording there. Can I just check?
Yes, I think that his connection must be quite bad, but yes, lost Stephen along the way.
Okay, all right. It's possible we'll get Stephen back, but I know he had to leave at 12:30, and unfortunately I think he's disappeared entirely from the participant list, so that's definitely his computer misbehaving. Okay, unfortunately, Stephen, we've got you back. You're on mute. Can you unmute yourself?
Apologies, I'm not sure what happened there. Yeah, so those are the two recommendations that our inquiry report made. The government has rejected them. I hope that as a first step, those changes will be made. I hope they'll be made sooner rather than later, so we can start to overcome some of the problems that I think have been very powerfully highlighted in the other contributions this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Really helpful to hear how the committee's approached it. And I think the data problem is one of those extraordinary pieces of information to trip over. How on earth can we have the discussions we're having with so little understanding of the scale of the problem? Anyway, thanks very much for joining us today. I understand you're not able to stay on longer, which we will be having a Q&A session later, but we'll certainly share with your office what we get at the end of the seminar.
Thank you. I find that very helpful.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to our next speaker, Emma Burks, who's campaign manager at Asylum Matters. Over to you, Emma.
Hi there. Yes, Michaela, can I have my slide? Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so yes, I work for Asylum Matters. I actually cover the West Midlands, but just wait for the slides. If you go to that slide, yeah, that'd be great, and start from there. We're a national organisation. We were set up in 2017. We're an amalgamation of two other organisations. I cover the West Midlands, but there's others of us across the country. We don't do any frontline work, so we're a national campaigning charity there to improve the lives of refugees and those seeking asylum in the UK. We are specifically working on, we do stuff on asylum support, which I'll mention a little bit obviously later. But we also have campaigns around Fight the Anti-Refugee Laws, which is talking about and looking at the Nationality and Borders Act and the kind of the laws and policies that are enacted within that, but around that as well. Community, not camps, which is, as it sounds, about accommodation, so people to be accommodated in communities and not in camps such as Manston or large-scale accommodation centres. And then Lift the Ban, which is around calling for asylum seekers to have the right to work. Yeah, next slide. So obviously I'm here to talk about asylum support. I know quite a few people will know what I think basically asylum support is, how much it is, but just thought I'd lay it out there because it's in one place. It all came into force in the 1999 Act, and kind of came it was the National Asylum Support Service came into being basically in 2000. So people with an ongoing case get support under what's called Section 95, and people who are refused have refused asylum claims can apply for Section 4 support. There is a lot of stipulation around how and what grounds people are able to do that. It's not an automatic thing. Just to say that obviously the amount is there, it's £5.84 a day, but people on Section 4 get the same amount, but it's cashless, it comes on a prepaid card, and they cannot withdraw money. People in full board accommodation, because they receive food and toiletries, receive only £8.24. The additional payments of £3 and £5 that are there have not been increased, I think, they've never, I don't know if they've ever been increased, but they've never been increased since 2015. And the maternity payments were mentioned briefly earlier. There are two, it's a discrepancy between the two actually that have not been equalised. So people can apply for £300 if they're on Section 4, £250 on Section 95, sorry, and Section 4 is £250. But this has to be done 8 weeks before the baby's born or 6 weeks after. If it's not done in that strict period of time, then you do not receive it. So that is something that we'd like to see changed. So yeah, next slide. So just to kind of give a brief history of asylum support, because I think it's interesting, but I think it's kind of interesting how it's changed over time. So when it started out, it was at 70% income support. Actually, children were at 90%. The 70% was basically set because people were received full furnished accommodation and didn't have to pay bills. In 2008, the link to mainstream benefits was changed. So there was kind of a reduction that started then, but children's rates did stay at the same. However, from 2011 to 2015, nothing happened. So they were taken to court, the Home Office was taken to court and found to be acting irrationally. And the Home Office decided to do a full review in 2015. Which you can see there, the review that happened to families was quite catastrophic in the respect that they basically said due to economies of scale, they were receiving significantly too much money, unfortunately, and they reduced the amount for children by £16 a week, which in the end was challenged in court and was not successful, that challenge. And this is when the whole idea of essential living needs started. So since then, the asylum support, yes, next slide, please. Asylum support has been calculated up until last year in a very bizarre way to look at essential living needs. It was kind of a pick and mix approach, which is looking at on certain items, at different years, they looked at different items on the ONS data for the expenditure of the lowest 10%. So basically what that would be. When that came out in March, that could be increased by the CPI for inflation, but so there was a pick and mix of looking at items under the ONS data, and then doing their own market research. So the market research that was done by the Home Office, which would list and decide what an essential amount of items were for a year, for example. So I know I've got one there around clothing, but just to talk about children and babies, it was considered that 4 500 milliliter bottles of baby bath, 4 bottles of shampoo, 4 bottles of baby lotion, 4 bottles of baby oil at 300 milliliters each, and 4 bottles at 500 grams of baby powder was considered to be enough for essential living needs for a child over a year up to the age of, for a baby anyway, especially up to the age of 1. So this is kind of like put together. They then go out and look at all the different outlets and such to try and work out how much it costs, kind of average it all out, and then come to a figure that's for the year. And then they divide it by 52, because obviously it's provided on a weekly basis, which is just is obviously not very demonstrative of what people's lives are actually like. So that's kind of what happened up until 2020, this kind of like pick and mix of variables. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So how was it calculated last year? So there was a break to this kind of tradition of doing these things of the ONS data and the market research. And last year, they basically took the flat rate from the market research and ONS data of the year before, which was £39.63, and they just increased it by the September CPI rate, which was 3.1%. And that's all that happened last year. 2022, the Home Office did put a call out. Voluntary sector organisations are informally consulted in the summer for information and what we feel should happen. And they are currently looking at the review of asylum support rates at the moment. If they decide to do what they did last year and just increase it by the CPI rate, it would go up by 10%. However, the problem is that the baseline that they would be starting from is so low, even with a 10%, which would be a large increase for asylum support. This is just still would not be touching the sides regarding the cost of living crisis at this moment in time and all that kind of stuff. So in the end, is we're waiting to see what the methodology is going to be this year. And hopefully we'll potentially know before the end of the year, or it'll be announced at the beginning of next year. So yeah, next slide. So impact of these low rates of support. So currently asylum support rate stands at 53% of universal credit for over 25s. But a migration observatory, even though there has been incremental increases over the number of years, which there have been, like last year, it was like, so you could see £1.22 increase per year. It's actually in real terms been cut by 27%. So it's never been able to keep up. It hasn't kept up for years. So in the end, obviously, even if we increase it now by the CPI rate of 10%, it's still not going to be enough. So next slide, please. So just to say that low rates of support, the impact of it, we in 2020 did a survey of over 880 people. We had a report which basically came out with the findings of that, which you can see some of the findings and a quote from there, from our report. We are looking to do this next year. If you would be interested in asking people or getting people involved in that survey to give us the data, which obviously we would then feed into next year's review of asylum support to try and highlight to the Home Office that, you know, obviously support rates are just not acceptable and people cannot live on them, especially in a time of cost of living crisis at the moment. But that was some of the findings we had. So yeah, and I've got the link there to the report that you can have a look at for yourself. So yeah, next slide, please. So what are our asks around asylum support? The main standing ask has always been to reinstate the 70% of universal credit, which obviously and we would want it to be for the increase from when it was going to happen in April. So obviously that would then at least track with welfare benefits, although we accept that people living on welfare benefits it's still not sustainable, particularly long term. But in the end, is like if we could get it to that 70% rate, I feel that would be at least a starting point. We've called on a number of times for increasing the additional payments to the £3 and £5 a week for people that are pregnant or with young children, and to equalise the maternity grant and have an easier application system that's not so rigid, because people then lose out with that money because they're not aware that they can get it. Or, you know, looking for a bigger ask, why don't we reevaluate the entire process? There is the minimum income standards that Joseph Rowntree have put forward, which kind of looks at what people need to have a decent and decent way of living. And also we always put in there around lift the ban, which means that people could, if be able to work, would be able to go out and support their families and be able to add the income. How we deal with these asks, and I know there's going to be a little bit of stuff in the breakout room about how we put these asks forward. Obviously, there is the review that happens every year where we do put this information forward, but we like to gather information over the year. And what we've done this year is I have got a draft template press release if people are interested. If anybody, you know anybody that would like to be interviewed and be able to have their story out there in the media, obviously that could be done anonymously, etc. And I'll put in the chat a local media article that was done here, actually in Birmingham, and an independent article we've been working on recently to try and get that out in the public domain so people know that this is happening, but also to gather that evidence together to basically push for an increase in asylum support. So that's me. Just the next slide is just my contact details and our website, etc. So.
Thank you very much, Emma. That was incredibly thorough overview of I think, a very complex area. And it is so frustrating to see that the actual rates have declined over time. I think it's just utterly shameful to have the situation we have now, and to be so conscious of what we actually had as some of the original principles being lost. So we'll move now to Q&A session. So Asfa, Carolina and Emma, if you could all put your videos on, that would be fantastic. If people have any questions you'd like to ask them. Unfortunately, Stephen Timms wasn't able to stay past 11:30, so it'll be speaking to Asfa, Carolina and Emma. got lots of questions here. Jazz, would you like to ask your question?
Hello there. Hi. Yeah, my name's Jazz Batar, and I am one of the immigration solicitors at Rights of Women. So I really wanted to sort of focus a bit on Section 17 support. We run an immigration and asylum advice line, and we do get many women that call us, and they've actually been told to call us by local authorities who are providing them with Section 17 support. And these local authorities are often pressurizing them to get immigration advice and imply that they're going to withdraw support if they don't get advice or don't take any steps to regularize their immigration status. So I don't know whether anyone else has experienced this. We do get a lot of this, so it's interesting to know if anyone else actually hears from women who've been told to do this by the local authority. The other point I wanted to raise was that very often, I mean, I wouldn't say very often, we have had some occasions where the local authority have offered to pay lawyers for women who are actually on Section 17 support to be able to make their immigration application. And we've actually managed to persuade some local authorities to do this, because what generally tends to happen is the types of applications that these women are going to make are going to be Article 8 applications. So it could be, parent of a child. It could be a private life application under the immigration rules, and they're all out of scope for legal aid, which means that the women need exceptional case funding before they can then go on and make their immigration application. And it's so difficult to get any legal aid lawyers to actually take on ECF cases. It's so hard. The women either have to then go and look for a pro bono lawyer, or they end up doing it themselves. And very often, if they're not providing the correct evidence or sufficient evidence, the application is going to be refused. So I'm just wondering whether, and local authorities, the ones that we've spoken to, have actually paid application fees because they can't, they're thinking about the economic impact on the local authority, because it's going to mean that they no longer need to provide long-term support. It actually makes financial sense to them to actually provide funds to pay lawyers, because once that person's application has been application status has been resolved and they've got leave to remain or indefinite leave to remain, then they're in most cases able to access public funds. I'm just wondering, is that something that we can do sort of jointly, in the voluntary sector, is to try and encourage local authorities to do this, because it does actually make sense. And we know that since the no recourse to public funds policy came in, that local authorities have been very stretched, because, as Asfa was saying, there's no saving to the taxpayer by having this policy in place, because you end up having to another statutory agency then has to fork out the funds, so it doesn't make any sense. So those were the points that I wanted to make, and I have got other stuff, but I'll leave. I'm sure other people have got questions, so just get on. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks very much, Jazz. Lots of points raised there, and I'm interested. The presenters, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, I thought, thanks, Roz. Thanks, Jazz, for those points, because they are interesting points, and they're points that are being discussed in the sector. I mean, certainly with regard to your last point about local authorities paying lawyers, I don't know if I don't think, I mean, our advisors probably would be able to give us a better idea, but this is certainly an area that, when I talked about him in my speech, it was around targeted funding. So this is an area where at the moment what we see is that there is no targeted funding for social services when providing Section 17 support, and part of that, the wish for there to be that targeted funding would be around areas around providing immigration support. So local authority can make referrals to solicitors in order to for clients to obtain immigration advice, and it's really important that they do that, because as you rightly pointed out, that as soon as somebody receives immigration advice and is allowed to regularize their immigration status, then it would be that eventually if status is granted and access to public funds has been granted, then they would move from Section 17 support to public, not taking any more funds from the particular local authority. I don't know how regularly that happens. It sounds like you've seen a lot more cases than I know of, but that is certainly something we'd like to see. As far as the earlier point that you mentioned also about withdrawing support if clients don't get immigration advice, I mean, one of the reasons for that social services may look at when providing Section 17 support is to see whether there is a legal impediment against removal. And one legal impediment is if someone has access to immigration advice and is putting in an immigration application. So we do find that local authorities do push people towards obtaining immigration advice, which is what we'd want them to do in any case, but are looking to see whether they have put in an application or not, so that they can argue that basically if they don't have an immigration application in place, then they're not required to be supported, or they can be returned home. So there is no legal impediment for them to remain in this country. And I think that is probably where that area is coming up for you at Rights of Women.
Thanks, Esfa.
Yeah, thanks, Esfa. Thank you.
Thank you. Carolina or Emma, you might want to comment on that, otherwise we'll move to the next question. Yep. Okay. Rachel, Constance, would you like to ask your question? And I'll just flag up, we'll wrap up questions at this point because we are running considerably behind.
Hi, my name's Rachel. I'm one of the children's nurses that works in a health inclusion team in London. I just wanted a bit of clarification around the Section 17, just because we had a case recently. Well, let me start with my question. So my question is, when Asfa, you were talking about the financial rights and the accommodation rights, is that when someone is classified as destitute, or do those same things apply to people who have applied for under Section 95 and are seeking asylum? Do they still also get the right to Section 17 support, in addition to what they get through their Aspen card and their accommodation?
No. Section 17 support is a different support provided by the local authorities, and you don't have access to both. You can't have access to Section 95 and Section 17.
Okay, no, that's really helpful. Thank you. And the other one was, my other question is linked to a specific situation. I think this is probably where I was getting a bit confused. So in terms of when it comes to safeguarding, in a sense, so I'll tell you the case study. It is a mom who's just been discharged from hospital. She is seeking asylum. She has 2 children. Mum's recovering, and at this moment in time, she's not able to meet all of her children's needs, things like, washing them in the morning, getting them ready for school, actually taking them to school. So we asked for kind of a referral to the local authority for support for this mom, temporary support. Whether that just be, well, I suppose it does come down to money, just in terms of could someone support them getting them to school? Their assessment was that mom had no rights at all to financial support under Section 17. And so they gave mom a list of local babysitters and said, mom just needs to go away and find a babysitter. So we obviously came back and said, surely this is not the case. But actually, is it the case? Because they're not entitled to any Section 17 support unless they're risk assessed as safeguarding at risk of harm.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm going to say here, because I'm not an advisor at Project 17, and what I would strongly suggest, I mean, it's not unusual to see situations like the one you describe, but what I would suggest is that if you haven't done so, it would be worth contacting Project 17 on their advice line to get some advice, because obviously there's a whole set of information that needs to be taken from the client around their situation to properly advise on that. So I'm going to pass that on in that way, if you don't mind.
No, that's helpful. I think I was just getting a bit confused about the two different rights between the 95 and 17.
Yeah, I think there are lots of problems here where if local authorities, as we've already said, and where I spoke around the fact that there is no targeted funding around this, and there is a tension around providing that support. So as you can imagine, what local authorities, what we see in practice is that they are holding their coffers very close to their chest. So if they don't have to give it, they won't. And as I already sort of demonstrated through their gatekeeping tactics, if they can find a way not to provide that support, they will try very hard. And if there are other sources of support available, so if you are talking about an asylum seeker, immediately they will start thinking about what other asylum seeking support options are there, and they should be taking them rather than assessing them, because that's also a complication. You know, assessments take a very long time and they may refuse to assess. So if there's another avenue, they will take it. So I'd strongly suggest anybody in that situation that you do take advice from Project 17 around that, so that you can make sure that the particular individual client is receiving the right support for them, because you're not going to get that right answer necessarily from the local authority concerned.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Just very quickly on that, I totally concur with that. And just to say, just because someone's on asylum support doesn't mean they can't get extra support from social services if the children are desperately in need of it, if they, you know, for whatever reasons. But as Asra said there, you know, get the advice and ask for the assessment, because it's not that they're excluded from it. It's just it depends on their needs and how they're assessed.
Thank you.
Thanks. I mean, I think these questions illustrate just how complex the system is and how difficult it is to find the support for the women we're seeking to help here, because it's obviously people who do this work on a day-to-day basis struggling to find answers to these questions. I think that's very clear, just how difficult that is. Well, thanks to our panel speakers today, so Asfa, Carolina, Emma and Stephen. We'll now take a 5-minute break, very, very short break, and then move into breakout groups. Now, I know we're running behind, so we will be planning to have our breakout groups starting precisely at 12:01, if I can be really explicit, 12:01, and we'll be going to ask the questions which are on the agenda that was sent out to you. So if you could take a quick break and then come back at 12 o'clock, that would be fantastic. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. Do we have everyone back from the breakout rooms now? I think we do. Fantastic. Okay, well, I'm conscious it's past. We've got a much shorter time available to us than we hoped. We will have a quick report back from each of the breakout groups. I'm going to ask people to stick to 2 minutes each. Before we do that, I will talk about what we'll be doing after this session so that we don't lose anyone before we have that wrap up. We're going to share the recording of the session. We're going to share the slides from the session. People have asked about those. Both of those will be made available to everyone who's attended. There will be work that falls out of this work, and to some degree, we're trying to work out what's the most useful intervention that we can make here. Obviously, we'll be working with the groups that have been taking part in the session today, and there are many others that we work with directly as well alongside this. So we will definitely be taking forward many of the issues that are raised today. As I think everyone's aware, there's a lot of issues, so it is important for us to be fairly targeted in our engagement so that it's going to be constructive. Also, I think one of the other things that came out of some of the discussions today is the need for training, and we do offer training to frontline workers and health professionals, so we'll be looking at how we can do that. Okay, let's move now to report backs. We have several groups. Actually, Charlotte, would you like to start? Charlotte.
Yeah. Sorry, I think you can hear me but not see me. I think Michaela might have to do that, so that's fine. Thank you. Yes, we had a good discussion in the time that we had available to us, looking at various different issues. So what are our most important campaign asks? We talked about the immigration system and how it's full of obstacles, it's difficult to navigate, looking at where to go to seek help, and where you can get kind of clear information. You know, it's not designed for the user. It's very much a top-down heavy system that is not easy to navigate. We looked at who needs to be influenced. We think it needs to be a multi-level approach, including many different agencies. And we thought there was perhaps a need to expand this conversation wider than perhaps we've got today, and look at bringing other organisations in to this discussion to bolster and to gain kind of movement and discussion. And also we talked about the national campaigns and looking at kind of a joint up approach, you know, making sure there's no duplication of services, and you know, is one voice stronger, or is many, you know, a multi-pronged approach the way forward? Thank you. Sorry, that's a bit of a rattle through, but yes, thank you.
Thanks, Charlotte. Abby, your group. I'm not sure if it's you reporting back or there'll be someone from your group speaking.
Yeah, I think Jazz is going to speak first.
Great.
Hello.
Jess?
Hi. Yeah, sorry, I had difficulty muting myself. I'm afraid we didn't get very far in the time allocated. So I think we talked mainly about the big issue that is a no recourse to public funds policy, and that is the kind of, you know, that is something that we talked about. We want that scrapped, but it's going to involve a radical change to the immigration rules, is going to, you know, radical changes to benefits legislation, etc. So it's very difficult, and this current government are probably not going to be, you know, wanting to do that. Is something that we could work on, you know, in the long term. What we did discuss was the justification for that was the GLA report about how, you know, taxpayers are not being saved any money by having this condition in place, because, you know, cost is shifted to other statutory departments. What we did discuss was that if that is sort of the ideal ask, then sort of going down, you could actually have a situation where a person is granted limited leave to remain, but they everyone is eligible for the no recourse to public funds. Sorry, everyone is eligible to public funds unless they actually have income or savings. So you would start, that would be the starting point, that everyone is eligible. So you wouldn't need to change the immigration rules in the sense that, you know, everyone would still be granted limited leave to remain. It would be the no recourse to public funds policy that would need to change. So that's something that could be a possible solution. We also talked about, we didn't really get very far with this, was regarding the asylum support rates. And even without the cost of living crisis, you know, £40 a week, it's just completely inadequate to support women. And, you know, £3 and £5 a week for those with children it's just absolutely ridiculous. So, you know, we'd want those increases in line with the recommendations that have been made by yourselves and also in Emma's speak earlier this morning. So that's what we sort of talked about, but we didn't get very far about who we're going to influence and what we're going to be doing. Sorry about that.
Thanks, Jazz. Yes, I'm conscious they're big questions and not a lot of time, I think. No, that's very helpful. Thank you. Jerry's group. I'm not sure if Jerry's presenting or someone else from that.
No, Kerry's going to present, and we didn't get too far, but Kerry, we've come up with a couple of things we hope is useful.
Yeah, so yeah, Jerry asked me kindly to feedback. So the first thing was we would like to prioritise action on no recourse to public funds, recognising that perhaps we're in a kind of window of opportunity at the moment based on the fact that we're in a cost of living crisis. So we suggested potentially taking a child health focus, cost of living focus, and bringing together professional bodies, particularly medical bodies. We know that we've done some of that work in the past, and I'm a public health doctor and I work at the Faculty of Public Health, and we would be very interested to support with that. We also have links with the Royal College of Paediatrics, as I'm sure you do too, and the BMA. I know them, some of the work there they're doing is really on board with this kind of work, so that's a potential position statement or kind of coalition that we'd be interested to support with as well. And then the second thing was action on asylum support. So someone in the group made an interesting suggestion about harnessing support from trade unions, or recognizing that actually increasingly they are interested in taking a more community focus to try and broaden their remit. So using the kind of term of linking the fights, recognizing that the asylum fight is a community level fight that impacts people's well-being and their work. So yeah, that's our other suggestion. Thank you.
Lovely, thanks very much. And Josephine, I'm not sure if you're presenting or one of your people from
the group. I took notes, so I can. Others, please chip in if I inevitably forget something. Thank you, first of all, for the session. It's been really fascinating and I've learned a lot of new things. We also did not get so far with our discussion. We mainly focused on the question around what are the most important campaign asks, and we started off talking about the fact that, you know, ultimately what we would all like to see is that NRPF is just simply abolished, and luckily everybody agreed on that. But then we had a really interesting suggestion from Carolina that actually even abolishing NRPF isn't going to kind of improve the situation for some people who will still struggle to access benefits and support because of the complexity of their status and various other issues. And so instead, maybe we ought to be thinking more generally about some sort of legal protection against extreme poverty that would apply to everybody in the UK. And everybody, I think, got quite excited about this issue because obviously it would both allow us to sort of circumvent the government's us and them divide and rule approach, and allow us to kind of link together issues that pertain to the benefit system and its kind of general inadequacy, as well as the problems faced by people currently because of immigration status related issues, as well as, you know, allow us to do some advocacy and campaigning that doesn't necessarily involve directly talking to the Home Office, because I think most of us recognise that is often just a massive waste of time. So, you know, we could think about engaging with the Department for Work and Pensions, except, you know, other departments that are maybe more open to this, and potentially also with Labour Frontbench, thinking ahead to 2024, and see if there's some interest in kind of making a commitment around that issue. And I think this would also help to alleviate the tension between the organisation, between the asks, you know, the focus that some of us end up taking, and I include praxis in that, are sort of incremental operational level changes that would alleviate the situation for people kind of right now. So, for example, a campaign that we ran earlier this year on access to free school meals for kids within RPF, which is okay. I mean, I'm not sure if it's actually benefiting anyone, but, you know, it's something that could benefit children in the immediate term. But it does nothing to actually address the underlying problems of an RPF. So taking this sort of overarching approach would allow us to kind of try to keep moving forward towards the ultimate systemic change that we really want to see. But, you know, whilst working on these incremental changes along the way. Yeah, I think that was more or less everything, but please, others from my group, you can jump in.
Lovely, thank you. That's a suggestion out of left field. Very interesting to have a look at that. That's great. Okay, Kimena, is your group able to report back?
Yep. So we also didn't get further than what's the most important campaign asks. We covered quite a wide area in that discussion. Similar to other groups, obviously the sort of abolition of NRPF being the kind of a key overriding ask that we recognise might take a long time to achieve, but it doesn't stop it being a priority. But then also we were talking about support rates, and the support rates provided to families under Section 17 being far too low, and obviously being pegged to asylum support rates. So they're kind of inextricably linked in terms of the levels that they're at, and at the bare minimum, they should be in line with the benefit rates. So that being a kind of priority to call for. We had a bit of a conversation about accommodation and what you can do to improve standards in accommodation when we're in this kind of housing crisis that affects the whole kind of country, and whether there is a call for any kind of minimum standards that we could use to sort of improve the situation there, or whether there's kind of further legislation that could force local authorities to act better. But we recognise that obviously that is a huge area as well. And then we had a couple of suggestions that were a bit more specific, and we thought probably a bit more achievable, to do with those with pre-settled status. The first being that they currently need to prove their right to reside to access benefits, and it's really unclear how they do that. And actually it's a very simple ask to get the Department of Work and Pensions to provide clearer guidance and examples of how they can go about doing that. And also the issue of babies born in the UK to parents with pre-settled status. They've got 3 months to apply for status, and they've got free healthcare in that 3 months. But if they haven't applied within that time frame, they wouldn't be eligible again. So could that time frame be extended? So we went from kind of one extreme of massive, huge, long-term campaign asks to a couple of things that were probably quite achievable.
Brilliant, thank you. Now, have I covered all the groups there? Is there anyone who I've missed? No? Okay. Had your chance. Okay, well, we'll wrap up in a moment. I had planned to do a more general sort of chat about some of the things which have come up from the complexity of the immigration system, the labyrinthine processes, and the extraordinary low levels of support. I don't think at this point we've really got the time to do that. So what I will say is we're going to write it all up. We'll put together a document that comes out of this. As I said before, we'll share the recording and we'll share the slides. So we are now at the point of thanking everyone. So thank all of you for coming along today. Really appreciate you making time to do this. It's a critically important issue. It makes life utterly miserable for the women. It makes life impossible for those trying to support the women. And it's in the cost of living crisis, it's only going to get worse. So it really is critically important to be able to take action now. So I'd like to thank funders, the funders contributing to this, Esme Fairburn, Trust for London and Unison. And I'd like to thank all of our speakers for their brilliant contributions. And on top of that, so that's Seke, Ella, Asfa, Carolina, Emma and Stephen. And also thanks to Abby Brunswick, Josephine Whitaker-Yilmaz and Kamena Dorling for facilitating breakout sessions. And on top of that, I'd like to thank the Maternity Action team who made today happen. I'd particularly like to thank Kate Moran, Jerry Hickey, Lisa Roscoe, Michaela Lee, Catherine Pellegrino, Christine Benson and Charlotte Pretty. So thanks very much, everyone.